Somewhere in America right now, someone is telling their grandchildren that the family arrived on the Mayflower. The DNA says they arrived in 1887 from a village in southern Poland they have never heard of. This is not a story about being wrong. It is a story about what the evidence actually shows and what it means for the millions of living Americans carrying ancestry they were never told about. In a 2023 Ipsos survey, roughly half of Americans who identified as white reported believing their family had been in the United States since before 1800. Half. That is tens of millions of people. And the DNA evidence collected from large-scale ancestry studies tells a completely different story. The genetic record is patient. It does not care what your grandmother told you. It holds the record of every migration, every union, every crossing, written in you. So where did Americans actually come from? The answer arrives in waves. First, understand who was actually here before 1800. The colonial-era population of what would become the United States was small, roughly 3.9 million people at the first census in 1790. Of those 3.9 million, about 700,000 were enslaved Africans, roughly 20% of the founding population, a number almost never mentioned when people invoke the phrase founding family. Another significant portion were indigenous peoples living inside the boundaries that surveyors were only beginning to draw. The remainder, the English, Scots-Irish, German, Dutch colonists, numbered perhaps 2.5 million. That is the pool from which a founding family line would have to descend. Now consider this. The United States today holds 335 million people. The founding population was 2.5 million. The math alone should give you pause. Where did those other 330 million people's ancestors come from? That is the question DNA is now answering at scale. The genetics team at 23andMe, working from a database of over 12 million customers, published findings showing that the median American of European descent traces the majority of their ancestry to arrivals between 1840 and 1920. Not the Mayflower, not Jamestown, a steamship, a tenement, a railway ticket west. Between 1840 and 1924, approximately 37 million people arrived in the United States from Europe alone. That is not a footnote. That is the dominant genetic event in American history. 37 million people. To feel the scale of that, it is roughly equivalent to the entire population of California arriving in an 80-year window. They came from Ireland, fleeing the famine, from southern Italy, where land tenure had collapsed, from the Pale of Settlement, where pogroms had made life untenable, from Scandinavia, where the soil could not support the next generation, from Poland, Hungary, Bohemia, places that barely existed as countries at the time their emigrants were leaving. Each of those groups left a distinct genetic signature, not a vague European, a specific regional fingerprint that population genetics can now read. If your family says, "We're German," the DNA might confirm that, but it might also show Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry, Polish ancestry, or French ancestry folded in from centuries of movement across a continent with no fixed borders. That matters, because German was not a unified country until 1871. The people who called themselves German before that were Bavarians, Prussians, Alsatians, Rhinelanders, genetically distinct subgroups. The same is true for Ireland. Irish, in DNA terms, is not one thing. Gaelic Irish ancestry clusters differently from the Ulster Scots Irish population, whose roots are in Scotland, transplanted to Ulster by English policy in the 1600s. And the Scots-Irish became the dominant ancestry of a vast swathe of Appalachia and the American South, people who would describe themselves simply as American with no foreign origin at all. Researchers at Vanderbilt University, studying the genetics of self-identified American ancestry groups in the South, found that many carry haplogroups, genetic lineage markers, that trace back to the Scottish lowlands, not to England. Their ancestors left Scotland for Ulster in the 1610s, then left Ulster for Pennsylvania in the 1700s, then pushed south and west through the Appalachian valleys. 3 migrations, 0 foreign origin in the family memory. This is what population genetics reveals, that family memory cannot, the chain of movement that predates the oldest story anyone in the family can tell. Now for the piece of this story that surprises people the most: the hidden ancestry, the lines that were deliberately erased, socially suppressed, or simply never spoken of. A study led by researchers at Harvard Medical School, published in the American Journal of Human Genetics, found that roughly 3.5% of Americans who self-identify as white carry more than 1% African ancestry. 3.5% sounds small. Multiply it by the adult white American population, and you are talking about approximately 6 million people. 6 million Americans carrying African ancestry they likely do not know about. Why does that number exist? Because of a process historians call passing. Individuals of mixed African and European ancestry who, under the crushing weight of racial discrimination, crossed the color line and raised their children as white. It was a survival strategy, not a lie told to grandchildren. A choice made under laws that made black ancestry a legal liability, a barrier to property, to marriage, to life itself. And it worked, completely, for generations, until a saliva sample and a genotyping chip pulled the thread loose, gently, neutrally, with no judgment. The same Harvard study found that the concentration of this hidden African ancestry is highest in the American South, particularly in Louisiana, South Carolina, and Virginia, which makes historical sense. These were the states with the largest enslaved populations, the most entangled histories, the most reasons to draw a hard line, and the most reasons later to cross it. Now turn the mirror. The same research found that 19% of African Americans carry more than 1% European ancestry, expected given the history of slavery and coercion. But the same data also shows something less expected. Approximately 5% of African Americans carry Native American ancestry at detectable levels, not claimed ancestry, confirmed genotyped ancestry. Much of that came from the 5 civilized tribes of the Southeast, nations that held enslaved black people before the Civil War and whose communities merged with black Americans after emancipation in complex, documented, contested ways. This is what genetics does that no census ever could. It does not ask how someone identified, it reads what actually happened. Now, let's go to the part of this story that almost nobody discusses when they talk about American ancestry: the indigenous genetic thread that runs through millions of families who do not carry that identity at all. An analysis by researchers at the Max Planck Institute of Evolutionary Anthropology found that detectable indigenous American ancestry appears in roughly 2% of self-identified white Americans. Again, confirmed ancestry, not family legend. The pathways for that ancestry entering white American family lines are several. Intermarriage on the frontier, which was more common in the 17th and early 18th centuries than most histories acknowledge. Children of those unions who were raised in colonial or later American society, assimilating completely, leaving no record that could later be found in a parish register or census, only in the genome. And there are the Cherokee, Choctaw, and Powhatan descendants who passed into white or black American communities during forced removal periods, families that scattered and reformed under new identities because survival required it. The Trail of Tears removed roughly 60,000 people from the Southeast in the 1830s. Many did not make it to Indian Territory. Many who did left later, drifting back, disappearing into the population around them. Their DNA remained, carried by children who grew up knowing only one side of what they were, and eventually knowing nothing at all, the knowledge erased within 2 generations. Now back to the European waves. Because there is more specificity here than Irish or Italian or Jewish. The genetic record shows regional precision that the immigration record never captured. Take Italian Americans. About 16 million Americans claim Italian ancestry. But the genetic profile of Italian Americans is overwhelmingly Southern Italian, Sicilian, Calabrian, Neapolitan, not Northern Italian. Southern Italians carry significantly higher levels of North African and Middle Eastern ancestry than Northern Italians, a legacy of Phoenician, Greek, Arab, and Norman settlement across Sicily and the southern coast over 2,000 years, which means millions of American families who think of themselves as simply European are carrying measurably ancestry from North Africa and the Levant. The Mediterranean world was not European in the way we use that word today. Ashkenazi Jewish Americans present an even more specific genetic picture. Research led by Harry Osterer at Albert Einstein College of Medicine demonstrated that Ashkenazi Jews form a distinct genetic cluster, more closely related to each other than to the wider European populations they lived among for centuries. That cluster reflects a founding population that settled the Rhine Valley in the early medieval period, then expanded east, carrying the genetic signatures of their ancient Levantine origins, never fully absorbed into the European populations around them. About 7 million Americans identify as Jewish. A larger number, estimates vary but run into the tens of millions, carry partial Ashkenazi ancestry without knowing it through intermarriage across the 20th century. At 23andMe, Ashkenazi ancestry is now one of the most precisely detectable genetic signatures in their database because the founding population was small enough that even 2 or 3% can be identified with high confidence. Now, Scandinavia. The Viking myth is enormous in American family history, and it is partly true, partly distorted, and partly covering for something more complicated. Millions of Americans claim Viking or Norse ancestry, usually through Scandinavian grandparents who arrived in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the Dakotas between 1870 and 1910. What the DNA shows is that Scandinavian populations carry distinct ancestry from 3 ancient sources: the Western hunter-gatherers of Ice Age Europe, the Yamnaya steppe herders who swept in from the east around 3000 BCE, and Neolithic farmers from Anatolia. Your Scandinavian ancestry is not simply Nordic. It is a layered archive of Ice Age survivors, Bronze Age conquerors, and ancient farmers, all compressed into one genetic profile your testing kit labels with a flag emoji. And here is something the testing kits underplay. Scandinavian and British ancestry overlap significantly because both populations received the same Yamnaya and Neolithic farmer input. A result that says 30% British, 20% Scandinavian may be detecting different proportions of the same ancient source populations. This is not a failure of the testing companies. It reflects genuine ambiguity in the human record. Populations that migrated together, mixed thoroughly, and then were given different national names much later. Let's slow down on what haplogroups actually are, because if you have tested your DNA and seen letters like R1b or H1 in your results, this is what those codes are recording and why they matter to your specific family story. A haplogroup is a lineage of DNA mutations passed down through either the paternal line, Y chromosome, father to son, or the maternal line through mitochondrial DNA passed from mothers to all children. R1b is the most common paternal haplogroup in Western Europe, carried by roughly 50% of men in England, 70% in Ireland, and present at high rates in the Basque Country and Atlantic France. If you are an American male of Western European descent, there is a good chance you carry it. R1b arrived in Western Europe with the Yamnaya expansion from the Pontic steppe roughly 4,500 years ago. It largely replaced the haplogroups of the Neolithic farmers who had been there for thousands of years before. R1a, the steppe haplogroup that went east rather than west, is the common marker across Slavic, Baltic, and parts of South Asian populations. If your ancestry is Polish, Ukrainian, or Russian, you likely carry R1a. For African Americans, the most common paternal haplogroup is E1b1a, a lineage originating in West Africa, carried by most of the men who were enslaved and brought to the Americas. Its presence is a direct genetic record of the transatlantic slave trade. And on the maternal side, mitochondrial haplogroup L, the oldest human lineage originating in sub-Saharan Africa, is carried by millions of Americans across all racial self-identifications. It predates every migration out of Africa. It is, in a literal sense, the root. Now, one of the most important parts of this story for living Americans to hear. The myth of the founding family is not just statistically improbable, it actively distorts how Americans understand who has a claim on this country. If only 2.5 million people of European descent were present at the founding and the US now has 335 million people, then statistically, most Americans, of every background, are descended from people who arrived after the Republic was already built. That is not a diminishment. It is an accurate account of what America has always been. Not a fixed origin story, but a continuous arrival. The genetics prove it. But there is a personal dimension to this that is worth sitting with. If your family told you that your roots here go back to the Revolution, and the DNA shows your great-great-grandfather arrived from Galicia in 1902, what do you do with that? You do not lose the family. You gain the full story. Galicia, now divided between western Ukraine and southeastern Poland, was a crossroads of Jewish, Polish, Ukrainian, and Austrian culture for centuries. A family from Galicia in 1902 likely carried Polish, Ukrainian, Ashkenazi Jewish, and possibly Romani ancestry in varying proportions depending on which village, which valley, which generation made the choice to leave. That is more history, not less. That is more identity, not a replacement for the one your grandmother gave you. Now for the physical signatures. Because ancestry does not stay hidden only in a database. It shows up in ways families have noticed for generations without understanding the source. Hair texture, eye color distribution, the shape of the jaw or the bridge of the nose, skin tone variation within a family that traces itself as uniformly Northern European. Researchers at Penn State found that eye color, long assumed to be a simple genetic trait, is actually controlled by at least 8 genes, with significant input from ancient population admixture events going back thousands of years. The lactase persistence gene, which lets adults digest milk, was almost absent in Europeans before 3000 BCE. It spread with the Yamnaya expansion. If your family has tolerated dairy for generations, you are carrying a genetic legacy of Bronze Age steppe herders. The gene variants associated with light skin in Northern Europeans arrived in Europe relatively recently, within the last 8,000 years, spreading with Neolithic farmers from Anatolia. Before that, even Western European hunter-gatherers had dark skin and blue eyes. This is the part that makes ancestry testing genuinely revelatory rather than simply confirming what you already assumed. The physical traits you inherited did not come from one source. They came from many, across enormous timescales, and some of those sources are older than Homo sapiens. Research from the Max Planck Institute found that most people of non-African descent carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA, absorbed when modern humans and Neanderthals interbred in the Middle East roughly 60,000 years ago. Your Neanderthal DNA is not inert. It affects your immune response, your hair follicle density, your sleep cycle, and your sensitivity to certain pain stimuli. It is still working in you 60,000 years after the encounter that created it. Americans of East Asian descent carry slightly more Neanderthal DNA on average. Americans of sub-Saharan African descent carry less, but carry small amounts of Homo erectus-era archaic ancestry of a different kind, a finding still being investigated by researchers at the Sanger Institute. The point is not that we are all the same underneath. The genetics actually shows how different the paths were. The point is that every American body carries a specific, traceable, deeply specific ancestral archive that no family myth has fully accounted for. For Latino and Hispanic Americans, the genetic picture is perhaps the most visibly layered of all. A 2014 analysis by researchers at the University of California identified 3 dominant ancestry streams in most Latino Americans: Indigenous American, European, overwhelmingly Iberian, and West African. The ratios vary dramatically by country of origin, by region within that country, and by family. A family from coastal Colombia carries very different proportions than a family from highland Guatemala, both calling themselves Latino. And the Iberian ancestry itself is layered. Spain's population carries significant Moorish, North African Berber, and Arab genetic input from the period of Islamic rule from 711 to 1492. That ancestry traveled to the Americas with the conquistadors. A Mexican-American family whose ancestry runs through central Spain may be carrying genetic echoes of Berber North Africa that arrived in the Iberian Peninsula over 1,000 years ago and were then carried across an ocean. This is the deepest lesson in American genetics. The ancestry is not a fixed origin point. It is a chain of movements, each one adding a layer, none of them erasing what came before. So, what does this mean for you specifically? For the person watching this who has either already tested their DNA or is thinking about it, what are you actually likely to find? If your family identifies as white American with roots going back several generations, the most likely finding is that your ancestry is more specific than you expected. A precise regional European origin rather than a broad national one. There is also a meaningful probability, roughly 3 to 6% depending on family origin, that you carry a small but detectable thread of African or Native American ancestry that your family history has no record of. If your family identifies as Black American with roots in the South, you will almost certainly find significant European ancestry, most of it from the British Isles and Scotland, arriving through the traumatic vector of enslavement. You may also find West African regional specificity, the difference between Yoruba, Fon, Igbo, Akan, or Mandinka ancestry, traceable through the patterns of the slave trade and the ports of departure. Researchers at Harvard have shown that African American ancestry can often be traced to specific regions of West and Central Africa with remarkable precision because the regional genetic signatures within Africa are themselves highly distinct. That is not a small thing. For families whose ancestral records were deliberately destroyed by the institution of slavery, the genome is the archive. It is the only record that survived. The genome does not forget. It carries what the courthouse fire destroyed, what the slaveholder refused to record, what the law would not acknowledge. It holds it precisely, faithfully, in every cell. Whatever story your family told you about where you came from, whether it was the Mayflower or a steamship, a plantation or a border crossing, a palace or a tenement, the DNA holds the complete version. And the complete version is almost always more interesting than the simplified one. More layered, more specific, more connected to the actual movements of actual people across actual centuries. The myth of the founding family serves a purpose. It gives people a sense of rootedness, of prior claim, of belonging to a place by deep time. Those are legitimate human needs. But the genetic record shows that almost every American earned that belonging the same way. By arriving, by staying, by building something, by having children who stayed. The DNA does not diminish the founding. It expands it, backwards into deep time, outward across continents, forward into the living person reading their results on a screen. If that is your family's story, it has more chapters than you were told, and every one of them belongs to you.